Welcome to Docomomo Tour Day. This event is sponsored by Midtex Mod. My name is Gregory Smith. I'm a rank and file member of Docomomo and Midtex Mod. I hope all of you, if you're not members of Docomomo, you sign up and you become a member yourself. I'd like to acknowledge the people who put together this event. Members of the board of Midtex Mod, including Charles Pivoto and Betsy Frederick Rothwell and Rick Black, put in a lot of effort to put this tour together today. I'd like to acknowledge the sponsors, the Marine Company, Dynamic Reprographics, Brent Humphreys Photography, who did the photography of the wonderful exhibit down the hall, and Hillside Pharmacy at 1209 East 11th Street, open for lunch and dinner today. Please silence your cell phones. We're going to have two presentations. And before I introduce the first speaker, Fred McGee, I'd like to say that I discovered the architecture of John Chase, like a lot of you probably did, by driving down MLK and seeing the Phillips house. Didn't know what it was called. We just knew it was that house, and David Chapel, and wondering what are these buildings, and they were so remarkable in so many ways. And about 10 years ago, when I first started teaching at the University of Texas in the historic preservation program, I had two students work on National Register documentation for two of these Chase properties. The Phillips House, which is on today's tour, and also the Teachers State Association of Texas building, which was the African American Teachers Association during the Jim Crow era, one of John Chase's first buildings that he designed probably while he was a student at UT. He's credited on the dedication plaque as John S. Chase designer. It's not open as part of the tour today, but you should go check it out over on Navasota Street. I'll introduce our first speaker, Fred McGee. Fred McGee is an award-winning historical archaeologist, green builder, diver, and sustainability consultant. He earned his PhD at the University of Texas at Austin and is currently adjunct associate professor of anthropology at Austin Community College. He's an urban anthropologist and an authority on the history of African Americans in public housing and on environmental justice and community development issues. He's the author of two major works, Two Texas Race Riots and The Black Crop, Slavery and Slave Trading in 19th Century Texas. He's the founder and principal of Fred L. McGee and Associates, one of the first African American diving officers in U.S. naval history. I've worked with him in my capacity as National Register Coordinator. He wrote the nomination for Santa Rita Courts, which is listed in the National Register, and he's also working on the Rosewood Courts nomination in progress. It's going to be reviewed by our state board in the coming year. Fred?
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Good.
Should I keep this open or should I close it? What do y'all think?
I think it's better open.
Better open?
I think so.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Greg, for that wonderful, warm welcome. And I'm delighted to be speaking about Mr. Chase today. I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet because ultimately the biggest thing that I hope you will do is to take the time to visit the buildings, visit the structures. It's a visual thing, and I could stand up here and talk forever. In my introductory remarks, in addition, I want to say what a wonderful thing it is to be seeing one of my mentors, Stephen Fox, here. Those of you who are architecturally inclined and know the breadth and depth of Stephen's experience might not be aware that he also has an archaeological background, through me perhaps. This is him down here with his signature on my own dissertation, The Black Crop, Slavery and Slave Trading in 19th Century Texas, which will at some point be coming to a store near you, depending on how things work out. Stephen, it's wonderful to be in your presence again. I haven't seen you in many years, and thank you to Docomomo for organizing that. So let's do a quick biography biography of John Chase. Much of what I'm saying, by the way, I have a feeling, is going to be elaborated on by a proper architectural historian like Stephen, unlike an archaeologist like me. Although I must say, as one of the few African-American archaeologists with a PhD, one of maybe 15 to 20 in the United States, and as the only underwater archaeologist, and the only one in full-time private practice, I really found myself getting that historical experience of deja vu in looking at the life and history of John Chase. It filled in a lot of gaps in my own professional background and experience, doing research on how important and how accomplished of a man he was. And you can read the highlights here. I'm not going to go over all of them. He's from Annapolis, Maryland, of course, a historic city, one of the oldest in the United States. Like me, he's a veteran of the United States military. Bachelor's degree in architecture from Hampton Institute, architectural engineering. And in those days, Hampton did grant bachelor's degrees. They don't anymore. They now only grant master's degrees for practitioners. He worked as a drafter in Philadelphia after graduation, moved to Austin, and then teaches as well. Part of Chase's background is his history as an educator. He, of course, becomes the first African American to enroll and graduate from the UT School of Architecture. Marries in the early 1950s after meeting his wife Drucy here while working in Austin, and then moves to Houston after graduation and is eventually hired as an assistant professor of architectural drafting at TSU. Very difficult to procure work as an architect, as an African American in Austin. All but impossible. No firm in Austin would hire him. Here's some representative structures of Chase's architecture. This is the ILWU building in Galveston, and then the Texas State Teachers Association building that Greg referenced. The Thompson House, then his house, and then of course over here the house that's currently owned by Dr. and Mrs. Stone on Benz in Houston. And here's another project that he did at the University of what would become the University of the District of Columbia, something I think Stephen will also talk about. And I put it up here because I think it's a wonderful example of Chase as a collaborator. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. Let's talk about some of his influences. Who are these guys? Are you ready? Most of you are architects, can't talk. Who are these guys? Well, we know who this guy is, don't we? That's Frank Lloyd Wright. Okay? And then this is Paul R. Williams, Paul Revere Williams, the Dean of African American Architects, the first African American to become a member of the AIA in 1923, and the first fellow. I think you can tell a lot about some of the differences and similarities between these guys by how they're dressed, okay? Because it really conveys some of the differences between African Americans and their relationship to architecture and people like Frank Lloyd Wright, okay? These were the two primary influences Chase said upon him, both architecturally and in other ways. This is an example. By the way, what's this? This is the Paul Williams House in Los Angeles. Okay, and you can see it's also a modernist structure. Okay, but from an African American standpoint, Williams was a wonderful entrepreneur and designed structures in a variety of styles. And unlike Wright, and I'll say this about Chase as well, he did not have the luxury of being as dogmatic as some of the architects that we now take for granted that dominate much of our architectural discourse today. Some other influences and influencers upon Chase, of course, Halloween Street, the Street Jones building, which is on East 11th Street, down the street from here. East the street in the name of that building. And worked with Chase, Troy Ragland, who was the contractor for the Texas State Teachers Association building. Wilhelmina Perry. Who here knows who Wilhelmina Perry is? Well, Wilhelmina Perry was a very important influence on Chase. She was a longtime professor of sociology at Houston-Tillotson Institute, Houston-Tillotson College, Houston-Tillotson University. Okay? And assisted Chase with his remarkable master's thesis, which I have brought a copy of today, although I'm not going to necessarily let you paw at it without me being there, because there's only 2 copies, and this is an original copy, okay? I think it's one of the more remarkable documents in 20th century, not just 20th century black architecture, but in architecture period. There's some amazing things in it. And then, of course, Everett Gibbons, Dr. Everett Gibbons, longtime leader of Austin's African-American community. Oh my goodness. This is too busy. I'll have to really, plow through this. John Chase was one of the co-founders of the National Organization of Minority Architects, which was founded in the early 1970s. And what you see here is kind of a chronology of the relationship between figures such as Chase and the AIA. Okay, and the circumstances surrounding that led to the founding of NOMA in 1971 in Detroit at the AIA convention. The founding took place at the home of Berry Gordy, the head of Motown Records. Okay, and you can see some of the things that have happened since. Okay, one of the things that's been really interesting is this. Well, you can't really see it. Is there a way you can focus in that? Melvin Mitchell published this book, The Crisis of the African American Architect, about 10 years ago. And it's really important to contextualize Chase's practice, not only in terms of what he did then, but where we are today. And where we are today is that there still is a long way to go in terms of African American participation in the field of architecture at every level, as well as the building trades to a certain extent. I'll have something, just a little bit, to say about that in the minutes that I have left. But for those of you who don't know anything about the relationship of African Americans to architecture, this is a very important book to read. Okay? This book really lays out some important things that I was completely blown away by, and I had no idea about, and were not part of my academic training. Now, I'm going to talk also about this gentleman here. Anybody know who this is? This is Quincy Jones. Not that Quincy Jones. A Quincy Jones, okay? Who was a modernist architect in Los Angeles. And a slide that I'm upcoming, there's only 15 slides in this whole thing. I'll talk about how Chase, like a lot of modernist inclined architects, found inspiration in Los Angeles. Los Angeles was a boomtown for much of the 20th century. Hint, hint, lots of lessons for Austin, okay? And if you really want to know more about modernist architecture in the United States, you kind of have to do a pilgrimage to LA. LA has a lot of good, a lot of bad about it, but one of the things that's really good is that it's one of the most amazing assemblages of modernist architecture on planet Earth. Absolutely iconic architects, Frank Lloyd Wright, his children, John Longman, the list goes to Paul Williams, on and on and on, of people who've done stuff out in LA. Okay? So let me talk a little bit about what I love this thing, the cigarette at the drafting table, from the bygone era, But, here's some similarities that I see between Quincy Jones and John Chase. Like Jones, Chase understood that design was more than creative form making. It was an approach. They were holists. They were people who were interested in creating spaces and places. Okay? It wasn't sort of this Frank Lloyd Wrightian or international style, this is how you got to do it approach. They were very pragmatic and practice-oriented. They were excellent networkers and collaborators and very good entrepreneurs and business people. They were not interested in what we would today call the starchitecture at all. Okay? Their approach to modern architecture was free of dogma and free of drama to a large extent. Okay? There was enough built-in drama already. They weren't interested in getting her done. They shared a holistic commitment to how space is used by collectives, not just individuals. Very important. It's an aspect of the International School of Architecture that has frequently gone forgotten. Okay? Its origins in European social housing of the 1920s and 1930s. The creation of social and racial justice and democratic placemaking or unmaking were central concerns for both of these people. And they were both educators and insisted upon excellence in their students and high levels of professionalism. And they were proud members of the AIA and organized within the AIA and criticized it when they felt it was appropriate. Jones and Paul R. Williams, Quincy Jones, this gentleman here, collaborated on a number of projects. As a matter of fact, one of them is in here. I'll show you here. There's two books that Paul Williams published in the mid-1940s, The Small Home of Tomorrow and New Homes for Today. These are reprints. You can actually take a look at some mid-century modern interesting stuff. As it was conceived of at the time, one of the designs that's in here that Paul Williams calls the Mariner is actually a Quincy Jones design. And Quincy Jones is one of the leading modernist influences on Paul Williams. Although Paul Williams, of course, he would design it in whatever style he wanted. Here, quite frankly, that's what he did. And that Chase kind of did that too. So let's take a look at some examples from Chase or from Quincy Jones and compare them with some. You can see in some of the pictures. For instance, his church architecture, and then this right here, the Mutual Housing Association outside of Crestwood Hills, a wonderful communal housing project that Jones beat John Lautner out for, that was based on Frank Lloyd Wright's Broadacre City Precincts. It wasn't never fully finished, but really demonstrates his interpretation of organic architecture. And then the St. Michael and All Angels Episcopal Church, and then the Sasha Raskoff Ceramics Factory. I mean, the Frank Lloyd Wright influence, the modernist principles there are obvious. In comparing the church architecture of Chase and somebody like Quincy Jones, it's important to bear in mind some of the things that Chase says in his master's thesis from 1952. This is it right here. And I've got some quotes up here for you. One of the ones that I want to read for you is the one that's here at the bottom. The church, due to its significant influences, developed into the first community or public organization that was completely owned and operated by the Negro race. It is the only institution other than the Negro press that the Negro controls. That was foundational for Chase, and is one of the reasons that explains his interest beyond the religious aspect in African American church architecture. Okay, specifically the predominant denomination in Black America, which is the Black Baptist Church of the South. It's one of the reasons why he came south after living in Hampton. Okay, and he also understood what the functions of the Jim Crow Black church were beyond just simply being a church. Okay, it was a social institution. It was a recreational institution. It was a welfare agency. It allows people to worship, of course, and congregate. And then it's a place of escape from Jim Crow racism that was endemic, apartheid, racial apartheid that was existing in America at that time. It was a refuge, a sanctuary. It discharged a lot of functions. And that heavily influenced his conception of how to do church architecture in Black America. And this is a picture of what his master's thesis project was. This is an unrealized architectural design for an African American church in Austin, Texas. I think it'd be wonderful to try to get this thing built. Okay. One of the things that he did in his master's thesis, furthermore, is advocate for the role of the architect and for architecture in the design of Black buildings. Now, the question is often asked, why are there so few Black architects? And I get asked too, why are there so few Black archaeologists? Well, the answers are somewhat similar. I mean, they're both to a certain extent bourgeois, middle and upper middle class disciplines. Okay? The foundations of American architecture, one could say, begin with people like Thomas Jefferson at Monticello and at the University of Virginia. Who were the laborers for those projects? Slaves. You want an answer to that question, why are there so few? The answer, like in much of Black America, lies in the institution of slavery. Okay? You have to deal with that reality in working forward about what you see today. Now that said, there are 1,000 African American architects in America now. That's still a small number. Okay? So it's not like it's been a completely invisible situation. But you get the point that I'm trying to make. Advocacy for architecture, especially at this time on the part of Chase, was to a certain extent a revolutionary thing. Because people didn't know any black architects. The people who built black homes, who built black institutions, were considered master builders. They weren't formally credentialed architects, okay, like Chase was. And what were some of the, by the way, the first part of his master's thesis, and this is the Wilhelmina Perry influence, the first probably 40% of it is sociology. To a certain extent, sociology and anthropology, where he does an extensive analysis of the African American church and comes up with some ideas. One of the things that he does is he takes pictures of existing churches in Austin, Texas, as they were at the time, okay? Ebenezer Baptist Church over here, okay? And then he talks about what he would consider to be a progressive alternative for the second half of the 20th century. And the example he comes up with is St. Paul Baptist Church in LA. Anybody hear of that church? Somebody knows. I see your hand going up. St. Paul Baptist Church, which he calls the contemporary type. Okay? And he mentions Reverend L.L. Campbell. L.L. Campbell was the leader of Austin's African American community for the first third of the 20th century. A longtime pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. Okay? Well, he was, nothing happened in Austin in those days during the Jim Crow era, just prior to the Great Depression, that didn't, in one way or another, go through Reverend Campbell. Reverend Campbell was the HNIC in Austin in those years, and Dr. Gibbons replaced him. Okay? And you can see, even though Reverend Campbell was not a formally trained architect, he had a great influence on the ability of people to practice architecture and just about anything else. One of the things that's cool about this master's thesis is the level of detail that Chase brings to his analysis of what will be required in a Black Baptist church. So you can see the sight lines. This is a picture of the pastor, okay, standing up on top of the podium, and the sight line that he would have of the person in the last row in the last pew, okay, floor elevations, things of this nature. These are the things that are fairly common today, but they've never been applied by an African American to an African American church environment in this way before, okay? He also discusses other things that were part of progressive church architecture. He talks about lighting. He talks about HVAC. He specifically talks about Austin's climate and whether it would be worthwhile for a black church to have mechanical ventilation, okay? Acoustics. And then, of course, soundproofing for things like cry rooms. You know what the cry room is? Right? Yeah, we have a cry situation with it. Okay? So this is all really wonderful stuff. And you can see the degree to which this master's thesis that he did has aspects of it that are comprehensive. He identifies the problem, furnishes historical context, and then comes up with what he considers to be a solution for a lot of these problems within the context of modernist architecture. Here's a picture of what this thing would look like, one aspect, the church entrance, from his master's thesis. Okay? One of the things I want to touch on, I only have like 2 or 3 slides left, is Chase and how he went and drummed up business as a lone black architect in Austin, Texas, and in Houston as well, in the early 1950s. What he did is he would go to these African American churches, which, as he well understood, were the primary institutions in black life. And he would bring copies of that master's thesis to the church. And he would have conversations with the pastors and members of the congregation, and he would explain to people, my name is John Chase, I'm an architect, a recent graduate of the University of Texas, and I wrote my thesis on progressive ideas for the black Negro Baptist Church. Would you be interested in hearing more? And in most cases, the answer was yes. So then the following week, arrangements were made for Chase and his wife to attend service, to participate in the congregation's life, and one thing led to another, and then the next thing you know, he would start getting commissions. Okay? Now this happened, of course, also while he was a student. I mean, he he just stood out. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of civil rights activism on the University of Texas campus in those years. But nonetheless, Chase understood that, he had to have a little hustle about it. Just like I'm about to tell you that my book is available for purchase. From the trunk of my car, I also have books on here for you, but I take credit cards. So, that's very important if you're going to be a solo practitioner, especially in these years. Okay? Now, the question is where did he want to situate this church? Okay? Now, this is one of the more interesting parts of the master's thesis. This here is where he wanted to put it. Now, his master's thesis is in black and white, so I had to update this. This is the 1954 topographic map of Austin, Texas, the USGS 7.5-minute quad, and this is the transposing of the circle where he wanted to build it. And the location that he wanted to put it is the current location of Downs Park and Downs Mountain Field, okay, which was empty space in those days. Okay? In 1952, when he wrote this, Downs Field was actually further east. Okay? Downs Field was purchased by the Travis County Emancipation Organization in 1938 after the city of Austin and the Austin Housing Authority used eminent domain to take Emancipation Park to construct the Rosewood Courts housing project. Okay? And that site is currently the location of Sims Elementary School in East Austin. And then this is just the end of my talk, and here's some pictures. I've already mentioned him. This is, of course, Tony Chase, Anthony Chase. You all know about him? Anybody here from Houston? Other than Stephen? You know, I saw you raise your hand. Anthony Chase, all of John Chase's sons became lawyers, professionals. Tony Chase, extremely important figure locally in Houston, a law professor, but also a member of corporate boards, huge influence maker in Texas and nationwide. Went to Harvard, personal friends with President Barack Obama. The list goes on and on and on. So I just had to kind of put him up here and say, this is what can happen to you, if you do good like John Chase did. And then there's another picture, of course, David Chapel, and then two pictures of Thompson House and then the Phillips House, which I hope all of us will get a chance to do there. And thank you very much for the time you had.
Thank you, Fred. We're going to have time for questions and answers at the end of our